it used to be when teacher called a parent would be like, okay, no worry, Johnny's going to deal with me. And there was never a finger pointed at a teacher accusing them of hurting their child. Now parents just beat teachers up, and not all. Again, I don't want to paint everybody the same brush, but teachers are constantly being picked on. And I know in the United States it's a lot more. You're banning books and you're doing all these things, and teachers are the ones who are feeling the brunt of it, right?
Yes, we all know that growing up is hard, and we know that the teenagers are even harder, but this is something different. This is something darker that has a hold of our teens. What is it? Well, with 25 years experience as an educator and a principal, today's guest, Leroy Slanzi, knows exactly what it is. And he's calling out the schools for their part in it and their part in fixing it. Leroy, welcome to the show, buddy.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Leroy, it is so awesome to have you. So not only does he know about this stuff, he wrote a book about it.
A book on it.
Called Emotional Schools, The Looming Mental Health Crisis and Pathway Through It. So Leroy, why did you write this book? And what did you learn while writing it?
I wrote the book because, well, it probably started 10 to 15 years ago, to be honest. A lot of people want to throw COVID into the mix, thinking that COVID is the great big problem with our kids today because of, not being in schools for 2 to 3 years. But this actually started, I would say for me, I started noticing, like I said, about a decade ago with kids coming to school sleep deprived. And, they'd show up to school exhausted, heads on their desk. You really couldn't get anything out of them. And as well as I do that if you don't sleep, you can be irritable. Your brain's not functioning the way it needs to be. All you want to do is sleep. And ultimately, it impacts what it's like for a teacher in the classroom, what it's like for the kid who sleep deprived their peers in the classroom, and it can snowball, right? And so, and that came along with the onset of gaming really taking root about 10, 15 years ago. And then, as we slowly got closer to COVID, social media started to take root. And then we had to deal with kids on Snapchat, on Instagram, on now TikTok is massive. And all of this is sort of playing into our kids' abilities to cope because they're more immersed into technology than they are in natural and free and structured play, right? The other piece to that too is the economy has shifted. And I grew up with a mom at home, and which was we were able to do because you were able to have a father that went and worked, and he was you could survive on a single income. You can't survive on a single income, whether you're in the United States, Canada, Italy, Australia. You need to dual income to just pay your bills. And with that shift in the economy, you now have a different babysitter that parents, use for their kids. And that's cell phones and gaming systems, because ultimately they can't afford nannies. They can't afford babysitters. So the world has just shifted. And because of that shift, it's led to this emotional instability in schools that revolve around kids being educated through a different means rather than what they used to be.
Social media is educating our kids right now.
It pretty much is YouTube, and I don't want to just crap on technology and all that.
Right.
I do want to, but there's a lot of wonderful things about technology that are great for our kids because they're growing up in a tech generation, right? And so for us, it seems a bit scary, kind of like back in the day when our parents used to get accused of putting us in front of a TV to babysit us, right? It's all generational, but it's definitely our kids are not interacting with their peers as much. They're not learning from their peers. They're not learning from human connection. So those interpersonal communication skills, those conflict resolution skills, they're just not happening naturally because they're on their phones or they're on their gaming systems, right? So it's more so that they're losing the education that's come naturally, and they're now in a place where they're distracted by technology.
What do we do about it?
We need to put our phones down. We need to structure in tech-free time. It's schedule in tech time. Let your kids go on their gaming systems for a couple hours a day, but you make sure they're outside for a couple hours too. It has to be a balance, right? And there just needs to be time where you're able to interact with your kids that doesn't involve technology, right?
Yeah.
Let me ask you, mental health crisis, it's a big deal, right? And you outlined some big dimensions of that. Two parents working, so someone's not home. The economy has changed. Social media, the 800-pound gorilla. Is it as simple as parents spending more quality time with their kids? Does that address the mental devolving of our teenagers?
Well, yes and no. I think it's as simple as being able to cope. So when kids grow up, you have to build resiliency to difficult situations, right? And usually when a kid from birth on, the natural progression in terms of building that resiliency and that ability to cope, it comes from that co-regulation. So you're not self-regulating as a baby, you're co-regulating with mom, whether she's picking you up and rocking you, and that's co-regulation, right? More and more now you see parents, when a baby is colicky or a kid is struggling, they'll stick an iPad in front of their face and let them watch a cartoon, right? Or give them a game. And that's the co-regulation that's happening. The co-regulation is happening between technology and the child. And so what's happening is that as kids, from birth on start to grow, that attachment piece and that ability for them to handle stressors is diminishing. And it's also diminishing because they're not playing with their friends. Because when they're outside playing well, think about, the big sandcastle and the Tonka trucks, and you're building a highway and one of your buddies has to come along and kick it. And they you're made this beautiful road and they knock dirt down, and then, you can get creative and think, oh, it's an avalanche. But usually you just want to punch your buddy in the head, right? And so right in that moment, at 5 years old playing with Tonka trucks, you have conflict, right?
Right.
And you're dealing with it face to face, and you work through it, and hopefully it doesn't turn into a fist fight. Sometimes it does. But at the end of the day, a kid at 5 is building those coping skills through play. They're building those coping skills through interacting with their parents. And so it really comes down to human interaction. And when that human interaction is not there, you can't build creative thinking skills, critical thinking skills, collaborative abilities, conflict resolution skills. When you don't have human contact, those things dissipate. And then as you get into school and as you get into life, you're confronted with something that's challenging. You don't know what to do with it. And as a result, you have kids all of a sudden, when they feel those emotions, they panic. And then they have these outbursts, and then it's just all hell breaks loose. And, back in the day, 20, 30 years ago, there might have been, you guys probably remember, 2 or 3 kids in class who were like, holy, what is wrong with them?
Yeah.
And, and now we probably know that they might have been autistic or something like that. But now it's not 2 or 3 kids. It's 10 to 12 kids out of a class of 30. And yet you have 18, 19 kids who are awesome. Parents have done a great job, attachments there. But those 12 kids, holy moly, that's a domino effect. They'll take over a class because the teacher's going to spend their time dealing with management instead of instructing. And you try to teach you teach a history lesson or a math lesson to a dysregulated, it's impossible, right? So you throw in all of these attachment pieces, this ability to co-regulate and self-regulate, and it's just a recipe for disaster. It's turning into a disaster in a lot of schools, and that's the piece where the schools have to come into play, because we have to pick up the pieces. Because as much as I want to blame parents for attachment issues, you also need to understand that parents are working longer hours. They need to work longer hours. Both parents need to work because they can't afford things, right? And then you throw in the technology that's coming front and center. It's just this perfect storm of distraction and whatnot, and it's leading to this generation of kids who just can't cope with the tiniest stressors.
Wow.
That's disheartening. It sounds like they arrive at the door of the school, like you inherit the problem as a school. You inherit the problem that was created at home.
Yeah,
and now
I'll give you.
Go ahead. No, go.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'll give you a good example. So I started about 25 years ago, and I'm going to move into the field of speech. So speech language, we have speech language pathologists who usually shows up in kindergarten, and they'll do a speech assessment on kids, right? When they show up to check to see how well they they can communicate orally. And, back in the day, at a class of 22 kids, you might have had 3 or 4 kids with speech issues. Now you're looking at, 60 to 75% of kids who have speech language issues because they're not even communicating
Wow.
as babies, right? When you do those things, oh, goo goo gaga, say dada, all that stuff. So the language at home, or the language, is disappearing because technology, parents are on technology and kids are on technology, and that
Wow.
natural
Never thought
oral
about it that way.
communication. Yeah,
Yikes.
so you got to think, you got to go back right down to what's happening with, I don't know if you know who Barbara Coloroso is. She's pretty famous, and she revolves her whole practice around natural consequence, right? So if you see your baby struggling to climb up onto the stool, don't lift them up by the butt, let them climb up on their own, right? But you're there to help, and there's a lot of not allowing for this natural progression, and then the co-regulation piece has to, that guidance has to fit in, and it's just becoming harder and harder. And unfortunately, and I have to back up because there's a lot of kids that are doing awesome. Like
Right.
60% of our kids, 70% of our kids, parents are doing a good job. They're doing fantastic, and parents are sort of in control of what's happening. But as that piece that was used to be 5 to 10% climbs to 15, 20, 25%, it becomes problematic because it's contagious, right?
Right. So if you're a parent and like all the kids have the phones and all the kids are on their game consoles, like how do you regulate your kid with technology, right? So how many hours is screen time? How old should a kid get a phone? Like, are there like actionable ways we can stop this crisis from happening, or are we doomed?
Yeah, no, there is. I think the first thing parents need to do is not buy their kid a gaming system until they're older. Or my son didn't get one until he was about 14 or 15, and it's when COVID hit because he was driving me nuts. So I'm like, and the hard part was is
You
he
win.
just was like, because like he'd get NBA 2K and he'd play that, but he'd get bored, so he'd want to go outside and play it. And my daughter's just never been interested in gaming, so it was not a. So I started them pretty late. The key is to make sure your kids develop curiosity early. They need to be outside playing in the grass, looking for 4-leaf clovers, playing with Tonka trucks, going to the swimming pool, playing catch, jumping on a trampoline. You develop those intrinsic curiosities, and what's going to happen is they'll develop that first. So you allow that to happen first, and if you allow that to happen first, then you can bring in gaming and technology because they're going to have a natural curiosity about, when they lift up a rock and there's a beetle underneath, or they're digging in the grass and they find a worm, and you take them fishing and they got to hook the worm, and you build all of those natural organic things first, and you put your phones down and help your kids soothe human by human contact early and often, right? And you allow that co-regulation, and you allow that curiosity and that creativeness to grow. Like, make sure you have crayons and paper and coloring books and all of those things. And then, and then once you develop that, then kids will have that intrinsic motivation, and they'll have that perseverance and that resiliency early on. Like that 0 to 5 years of a child's life is so crucial to how they're going to end up as adults, right? And so once you establish those things, you're going to find that once you do give your kids technology, they're going to be prone to be putting it down because they're going to get bored with it, because it's not as fun as feeling grass in your hands, or building sandcastles, or
Right.
collecting tadpoles down at the pond, and stuff like that, right? So
What if a parent missed that window? Right? There's a lot of people who will watch this will say,
Oh,
"Well, I should have spent more time with my kid doing those things."
can you
Right?
go back?
Well, not
yeah,
necessarily can you go back, and well, maybe, but I was going to say
What can you do
what
to?
are the red flags maybe they need to look for to say like, oh yeah, that did impact my child in a negative way.
yeah, and you can, because I did it. I remember I told you I was working as a high school principal for 5 years. My daughter was ruthless. She was like, "Dad, you're on your phone. Put your phone down, Dad." And this is before she became into TikTok and stuff. Because now it's like I have to battle her with TikTok, right?
Right.
And so I probably, and I feel a little bit ashamed because I probably lost a good year of and over the course of 4 or 5 years, I probably lost a year of really great contact with my daughter and my son because I was so immersed into work. But it's not too late. It's not too late to put your phone down. And this is where schools have to come in. Schools have to come in and bail parents out because as much as we want to point the finger at parents, this is new to parents too. Technology is new to us. It's just as addicting to us. This is why, Congress in the United States is going after big tech, Facebook and TikTok and all of this stuff because it's addicting. As soon as you hear Bing, it's a dopamine rush, right? You're constantly chasing that dopamine hit, and that's what drugs do. Cocaine is like a massive dopamine hit, and so it's correlated. And so what we have to do as schools is the moment we notice or feel a kid is delayed in their speech or they're having difficulties with their emotions, whether or not they're just shutting down and sulking, or they get angry, or they're frustrated early, or they're sad all the time. We have to pick up on that right off the bat, and we have to make sure that our social emotional learning program is up front and center right off the bat. Together, we can kind of meet this deadly force at the same time and help the situation. It's why I wrote the book. It's a roadmap and a guide for
really
parents
good.
and teachers to
Yeah.
structure, right? So yeah, we're not dead in the water.
At some point in your bio, you said you couldn't stand idly by and let this continue, right? That's why you wrote the book. But was there a moment that you said, that's enough? What inspired that moment and that thinking that said, I cannot not act?
My teachers, I feel for my teachers. It's getting harder and harder, and they're burning out, and they're tired, and they're exhausted, and it's sad. Not only when they burn out, it's more pressure on administration because you got to pick up the pieces. You got to get in there and bail them out when you can. And I think just watching teachers leave the profession in droves, and you see teachers coming in, teach for 2 years, and they're like, this isn't for me. Or you see teachers who've been at it for 25 years, 30 years, and they're ready to retire, and they're retiring with a bad taste in their mouth. And it's because of the behavior that they're having to deal with in class, right? And, I don't know how many times we had to have a lockdown at the high school because there was a threat of something, and whether it be a false threat or not. But you're just always kind of on edge from not knowing what behavior you're going to be confronted with. And then the other piece to that is, it used to be when teacher called a parent would be like, okay, no worry, Johnny's going to deal with me. And there was never a finger pointed at a teacher accusing them of hurting their child. Now parents just beat teachers up, and not all, again, I don't want to paint everybody the same brush, but teachers are constantly being picked on. And I know in the United States, it's a lot more. You're banning books and you're doing all these things. And teachers are the ones who are feeling the brunt of it. Right. And they're just trying to educate. And, there's this constant feeling that they're trying to indoctrinate your kids. But at the end of the day, they're just trying to teach reading, writing, and arithmetic. And the system is falling apart.
What would be some like 3 ways to kind of like divest themselves from technology? Or like, I know you say that they should go outside and play, but what if they're not in a safe area to go outside and play? Like, what would be, how do you handle that? Something like that.
Yeah, and that's the other piece. We live in a culture of fear now too, right? We have this fear culture where we think if our kids go outside, they're going to get kidnapped.
Right.
And when we grew up, our parents would say, see you at 9 a.m, we'd be back by dinner, and they wouldn't have a clue what we were hanging off a cliff or doing whatever, right? So yeah, and so that's the other piece. Because of media, as parents, we live in fear thinking something's bad's going to happen to our kids when it's just not the case, right? So my suggestion always, for teens is the first thing I tell them to look at is how lethargic are you? Right off the bat, I'm like, where are your energy levels right now? Have you had a shower? How's your hygiene? How's that going? And you have that honest conversation. And if it's struggling, it means that they're not getting up to do their basic, taking care of their basic needs. Have you eaten today? Have you had a shower? Have you put new clothes on? Have you, done those things? And then, the second piece would be is to revolve the conversation back to how they're feeling emotionally. It's like you're walking around here like you're sad, like you're depressed, like you're frustrated. And so I would go from those basic life needs and dive right into that emotional awareness piece, is to
Right.
ask them to understand what they're feeling, and then ask them, why do you think you're feeling this way? Let's figure out where this feeling is
That's
coming
good.
from, right? And that's a huge piece that schools need to pick up on.
Do you see a difference? Is there some type of correlation between socioeconomic and mental health of the students? And is there a difference between public and private in your experience?
So I wrote about that socioeconomic standing in my book, and my book is research based as well. So you would assume right off the bat that if you're from a low income household, kids are going to be more prone to being emotionally detached or struggle with their emotions more. And technically you should see that, because you're going to have kids who are being babysat by gaming systems and whatnot. But you also have affluent families where their means of attaching with kids is by buying them stuff,
Mm-hmm.
by spoiling them. And what I actually find is when I work with kids who are more vulnerable and from those at-risk type homes, they're very honest to a T. Like if they want to tell you off, they're telling you off. Whereas if you get a kid from a middle class to upper class, more affluent, they're more sneaky, to be honest.
Wow.
They know how to manipulate. They know how to give you the, hey, Mr. Slanzi, how you doing today? And then they'll go around the corner and they'll light a garbage can on fire,
Oh
right?
my
And
gosh.
it wasn't me. It was then they'll point the finger at Johnny over here, because obviously Johnny was the one who did it. Because look at him. You see this dichotomy between what type of behavior you get from low income and what you get from middle to high income earning homes. And at the end of the day, it all comes down to that attachment piece. Money doesn't decide where that attachment piece is.
Off the record.
Really?
Okay?
Nothing's
So
off the record.
nothing. I'm over recording it, but off the record, it's a new teacher comes to you, fresh out of college, first teaching job. Give me the scoop. Tell me the underbelly. Tell me the true. What's it like to be a teacher today? What's your best advice?
It all depends on who their leader is. It all depends on who's running the school. It all depends on who's going to be able to support that new teacher. I know when a new teacher comes to my school, I make sure we wrap around them. I make sure, you know, I, I co-regulate my new teachers. But a lot of teachers, especially when you're in an urban setting, when you walk into a school of 1,000, 1,500, 2,000 kids, you won't even know your principal's name.
Hmm.
And so you're going to have a teacher walking in with no peer role models, somebody to help and guide them, to help co-regulate them through that. And my suggestion to a new teacher who's entering an environment where it could be toxic, which a lot of school environments are toxic right now because teachers are frustrated, is to try to latch on to a senior teacher who gives a shit. And if you can latch on to a mentor, latch on to them. Don't be afraid to, most schools have a 1-800 number you can call if you're struggling with your own mental health and whatnot. Don't be afraid to reach out and say, hey, because the thing is with teachers, 95% of teachers are in it for the right reasons. They care. And so when people say, oh, don't take it home with you, it's like, shit, I'm
Of
taking it home with
course.
me.
Yeah.
I care about this kid too much. I'm worried if this kid is going to eat. I'm worried if they're going to have shoes on tomorrow. I'm worried if they're going to learn, how to spell their name. And so it's really hard, I think. And I think for new teachers coming in, they need to find somebody who's going to help encourage them to just fight the fight. Because that first year, you're as a new teacher, you're not working an 8-hour day. You're putting in 16 hours, little sleep, because you got to prep. Although AI is helping with prepping immensely, which is great. There's another awesome thing about technology. I think teachers, if they can get through that first year and they can develop relationships, and that's the key. If they can develop relationships with kids, because those kids will pull on your heart and they'll make you laugh and love and all that stuff. And if they can survive that first year with support, they're going to be good. But if they don't have the support, if the leadership isn't there, if the mentorship isn't there, they're dead in the water.
It's a good question. Yeah. Okay. I got one for you.
Okay.
What is your dream you can dream anything
Yeah.
for 10 years from now when it comes to kids and technology? Because I know you said the crisis is looming, but what would be the dream for 10 years from now?
My dream would be that kids are in a position to regulate their technology use on their own. My dream would be for kids to use technology for the right reasons. And, if they use it because, doing the wrong thing feels awesome sometimes, right? And that's the pull. It's like,
Right.
oh man, I want to do that again. That felt like, I don't know how many
That's
pieces of
true.
cheesecake I ate this weekend because it was so good, right? And it's the wrong thing because this belly is, but my dream is that with this book and I keep doing with these workshops that I do and my YouTube videos and reaching out. My dream is that I have a generation of kids that can self-soothe, that they understand being mindful and breathing, and that if they can soothe their vagal nerve, their vagus nerve, if they can soothe that physiological part, it'll calm your mind. And if you can calm your mind, you can think coherently so you don't do stupid things. I mean, still do stupid things because I mean, the most fun you have as a teenager is doing stupid stuff, right? So I don't want to eliminate it completely. I just hope we can get to a place where, we can get kids who can anything in moderation is good. You do it in moderation, and it's the same thing with your phone use and social media use. And I even have to do it myself. One of the things I do to stay in shape is I go for hikes. And so I just try to make sure I don't even have my AirPods in. I'm not listening to podcasts. I'm not listening to an audiobook. I just go for a hike and it's just me and birds. And if I run into a bear, I run into a bear or whatever, and
Nonchalant. Right?
I live in a town of about 10,000 people in the middle of the Rockies. So this is where I'm at.
That's
awesome.
amazing.
But, I would love to get to a place where kids understand moderation. They understand how to self-soothe. They understand mindfulness. And I feel like every kid in the last 10 years that have worked through schools that I've been in with the Play is the Way program that I use, that they're understanding meditation and mindfulness and that mental strength. So I teach it to death, but I embed it into curriculum so it's not extra for the teachers. And I hope we get to a place where teachers understand mental health and mindfulness and that need to stay calm so you can think. And I want the same for kids. And I feel like we could get there if we just did it together. If people watch this podcast and just start moving in the right direction. But again, it comes down to government and policymakers and people who haven't been in a classroom in 20 years trying to tell you how to do things, right?
We have this dream.
You have a dream.
This
That's right.
dream
It's a
is
good
going to
dream.
happen.
I have a dream.
Well, it's interesting. Your dream for 10 years from now sounds like you roll back the clock 40 years.
Yeah.
That's what it sounds like.
interesting.
Where
Yeah.
there is no phone. You spend time with your parents. You spend time with your friends. It seems to be a cure-all for many
my dad
things.
used to just come down and shut off the TV and say, "Get out."
Yeah, go outside.
And we'd
How
be
many
like,
times did you hear that? Go outside.
"Go outside." No. So
Go
hopefully.
play with some sticks and rocks. Go
Right.
be creative, right?
Mud
Well,
bar
how can we
fights.
help you get that dream to happen?
I guess promote my book.
Yeah, we're going to put it on the show
promote
Promotional
notes.
schools.
Promote I have two websites. One that's LeroySlanzi.com and the other one is playistheway.ca. It's a social emotional learning program that uses play to elicit emotions to teach kids to soothe. And it's all over Australia and New Zealand. It's huge and it's getting big in Western Canada. And it would be great to be able to get into more schools and teach teachers how to embed social emotional learning into what they do. Rather, because for teachers, anytime they get something that they feel like it's added onto their plate,
Right.
they just don't want to do it, right? So
Yeah.
this program, like if you're listening, teachers, this program embeds into math, socials, English, science, and it makes it easier for you to do so you can teach that social emotional learning without making it a class. Like you do it right in math, you do it right in these situations. So I think, yeah, if you can just promote
Very
that
cool.
stuff and
Wonderful.
get the word out, we can change it. We can change the world, man.
Let's go.
Right?
Is it
You
in
got
the
it.
Is it in the US? Are people using it? Are schools using it?
No, it's in Canada, but the ironic thing is we're copyrighted in North America. So I'm the only licensed practitioner in the Canada and the United States.
Wow.
Yeah, and the other, like I said, it's in Australia. It's huge in Australia because Australia is dealing with massive behavior issues in their schools. Domestic violence is huge in Australia. Like it's a big thing. And then same with in New Zealand, like it's Play is the Way is huge down there because it's having a massive impact, right? And it's
Wow.
all Yeah, and so it's one of those things that my plan is to start, moving towards the States to do workshops down there. But if teachers, schools request me,
Let's
bring me in
go.
and
I
I'll
love it.
do it.
Yeah, we'll help you.
We'll do what we can to help, for sure.
Right?
Right on. I
Oh,
appreciate
you're
it.
a gift. Thank you, Leroy.
Yeah, thank you so
Thanks.
much.
It's been an incredible conversation. Like we learned so much, and now you're gonna go. I can't believe you're gonna go now to school and be a principal and keep
Yeah,
Start your work day.
start your work day.
I'm gonna get in there. I'm down 4 staff today, so I gotta keep
Oh,
juggling and
You know the day
then
that
at
waits
school
you.
because I don't actually have an office. I don't have an office. I have it's called a calming space. So my office is in this big room where there's Lego and all couches and bag chairs. So
Wow.
first thing I get that there's kids in there underneath my feet playing Lego. So it's all just
Nice.
I don't do anything systematically. I do it
I
the
love
way
it.
it should be
Oh, I
done.
love
Keeps
that.
you young, I'm sure.
That's a
awesome.
whole other
It's gonna be a
book.
great
That's a
day.
whole other
Yeah.
book there.
That's great.
Yes.
Yeah. Well,
It is.
thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. We really appreciate you spending the time with us.
Thanks.
Awesome, you guys.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for having me. Have a
Guys,
great day.
call Leroy.
Call you. Thanks for John. Take care.